Hearing no questions. Yes, sir.
A lot of concern up there from the airport workers. A few of them I spoke to said they're not even confident that this would pass in September after having this vote delayed when in March you said it would be done by June. What do you want to say to those people who might be skeptical that the port is going to live up to this vow to finally vote on it?
Well, I will tell you that when we passed this in March, we anticipated, I think the word was anticipated, having the vote today. Very much wanted to do that. And as you've heard, my public comments were that late-breaking comments with some very complex issues were brought to the fore, and we had to do our due diligence. The four issues in particular have a great complexity about them, and they impinge upon whether it's a federal or state issue, a constitutional issue, a preemption issue. We've put a lot of time and effort into this. They've been waiting a long time. We're going to do this, and we're going to do it right, and we don't want to think because we didn't take the extra 30 days that this will fall on some false foundation in the future. So for the folks that we have reached out to, I know the executive director and others have had a great reach out with a lot of the union folks and other stakeholders. They understand what we're doing, and I haven't heard the skepticism that you just articulated.
I just add what I said in public, which is that there are two pillars here. First pillar on the part of the management team is to move forward the recommendation for a revised wage policy implementing the higher wage scale. The second pillar is to have an absolutely solid record on the basis of which the board acts, and we're pursuing both of those.
Yes, sir.
I apologize if I just missed the beginning, and you may have been asked this already. The legal authority that the Port Authority does or doesn't have to, regulate wages and everything. That's been an issue other places too. I mean, with cities. I mean, St. Louis passed a minimum wage thing, and then the state basically wiped it off. What are you seeing happening? I'm sure you're expecting legal action either way, no matter what footing you may be on, right?
Listen, I don't think we're forecasting or predicting legal action, but it would be silly not to think that it's not a possibility. It clearly is. Either way, regardless of the action, and if what we're saying is the proposal that we're going to stand behind solidly is going to be vetted, it's going to be as solid a foundation as humanly possible, and if it's going to undergo any type of scrutiny, whether it be a political, public policy, or judicial, we're going to know that it's going to stand on its own. Yes, sir.
Did the port, yourselves and your predecessors, as you said, for 4 years, 42 or 41 out of 42 meetings, except the short one in August. This has been discussed, debated, 3 different governors. Was something missed that only the airlines pointed out on June 11th? These 4 issues? It should not have the port and your staff and your commissioners have looked at these over these many years. When Governor Murphy came to your meeting in March, and he stood there and he said, "We're going to do it. We're going to do it in June." Did no one tell him, "Oh, there's still 4 issues"? And the second thing is, when would have been the anticipated start date of the wage ladder, and would that be changed in pushing back the potential approval date from now until September?
We'll only take them one at a time. There's a difference between a discussion at meetings and the formal legal process by which rules and regulations are addressed. And the process works in a very straightforward way, which is there's a proposal put up, it's put out for public comment, public and stakeholders submit comments, the agency reviews those comments, and in this case, in reviewing those comments, which are part of the formal record on the basis of which the board will act, there were 4 issues that were not signaled in the proposal. They weren't raised as subjects for comment. And those 4 issues were raised by comments, and in terms of building a very solid and considered record, the staff concluded that the best course of action was to put those 4 issues out for further comment. There will then be a full record in which all issues raised will have been discussed, and that is the record that will be presented to the board on the basis of which the board will act.
And the issues that were raised, and some of them I think the last 10 days, They are significant. They are intellectual arguments that have been brought our way that really have to be dissected, researched, and we have some work to be done. We have to roll up our sleeves and really, frankly, just consult with some lawyers and talk about some of the precedent and talk about some of the regulations and the impact that whatever decision is being made at the next, whenever it's being made, is the right one with solid legal backing.
Well, for
Yeah, and you
instance, the
can't-
off-airport consideration, as the gentleman spoke from the food services, why hadn't the port, in its consideration and establishment of these draft rules, thought of that? I mean, why did you folks miss that? And you had to wait till the airlines to bring it up.
I'm sorry, which issue was that?
The workers.
It's the catering workers who are
the
off
facilities off the airport and the impact on that.
But within the port. The proposal identified that as specifically as part of the proposed action. So we did not ask, in terms of the supplemental comment period, for further comment on that issue. That is a legal issue. It's a legal issue that we were aware of. It was a legal issue highlighted by the provisions, specifically a proposed revision in the existing wage policy. And we will address, the staff will address, the board will consider all of the legal arguments. And we will support the recommended policy with appropriate legal we will respond to the legal arguments that have been made, and we will respond to policy arguments that have been made, and at the point at which it comes back to the board, it will be a full and complete record.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm sorry. You had spoken briefly, I think, about PTC installations. Now, I know that you're doing that during the summer with the various stations, various lines, and there's some closures involved. When do you anticipate an actual test of the system, or has that already been done?
Well, there's a federal deadline here. The deadline is the end of the year. PATH is committed to having full implementation of PTC by the end of the year. It is our understanding that it will be the only East Coast railroad that will meet that deadline. PATH has been proceeding what it calls section by section to actually implement and activate the PTC system. And that is what it is doing section by section. And it will complete all sections by the end of the year.
Have any sections actually been completed and tested?
Yes, they have.
Any other questions? Paul?
I feel like for months now we've been asking about the passenger study for LaGuardia Air Train. So could you give us some clarity on when the study began, how far along it is, and when you expect it to be completed? And once it is complete, do you intend to share it with the public?
Well, where we are, which is a good place to be with the passage of the legislation, is at a time when we are now entering discussions or actually engaging with the FAA in terms of initiating the environmental review process. And that will bring together all of the supporting materials, engineering studies, and passenger ridership studies. And it will, by definition, be presented to the public in the course of that process. So I don't have a particular time in terms of exactly when each stage of that will occur, but we're now at a point where we will lay out the schedule for everyone to understand, and all of the materials all the elements of the air train, environmental impacts, operating impacts, financial implications, ridership studies will become public in the course of the review process.
But if you want to make the case for the air train, isn't ridership data or projected ridership data an important part of that case?
Absolutely. And just to be clear, the ridership study, along with the engineering studies, which are important, all environmental impacts, debate on alternative alignments will become public, will be debated, will be discussed in the course of the environmental review process. That's the nature of the process. It's all inclusive, including the ridership.
The environmental review process takes at a minimum 2 years, as in Gateway, and often much longer. So should we expect it in 2 years after the port has invested hundreds of millions in this, or will we be getting it sooner?
Well, as I'm sure you know, that until the environmental review process is finished, construction can't start. So the environmental review process varies depending upon the project. The third track project on Long Island and the Tappan Zee Bridge project, the environmental review process actually was in the vicinity of a year. We are targeting with the FAA for this process to conclude by the end of 2019, which is 18 months, and then for construction to start thereafter. So within the next 18 months and faster if we can work with the FAA to achieve that, is the length of time the environmental review process will take place. But let me just be clear on one item. It is the FAA's review process. So we're going to work with them. We're going to do everything we can to accelerate the process, but it is the FAA's process.
Given
Yes.
that the EIS documents need to be you said you intended to submit them this summer. I assume the port is a good way along in its idea for ridership, cost, and everything.
No, I didn't say when. The process starts now. We met with the FAA on Tuesday, 2 days ago, as a kickoff session. So now we have to work with them in terms of their process as to what materials they want, how they want them submitted, the schedule on which they will be submitted, and how the entire process will be calendared.
But given what you already know and the way that you are planning ahead, does the Port Authority have a back-of-the-envelope estimate for whether the AirTrain can at least break even?
Well, I think talking about back-of-the-envelope calculations doesn't make sense. We are going to present all of that in due course in the context of the environmental process, and we are going to do so in a very careful and meticulous manner.
Yes.
Question. Correct me if I'm wrong, the 30 minutes and under estimated, that was just looking off Long Island Railroad train schedules. Is that accurate?
The combination of Long Island Railroad train schedules and the estimated time from Willets Point to LaGuardia.
Sure, you take them off schedules. Okay. So my question is, considering there's no ridership study, and port officials, the governor, making bold claims to sell this project to the public hard, 30 and under, it's a pretty bold claim. Is this not just setting up riders for disappointment when that 30-minute ride doesn't materialize, or you don't even know if that 30-minute ride is going to materialize unless you have, modeling and, the ingrained, detailed studies you have to do?
Well, the 30-minute calculation is a matter of arithmetic, which is the time, Willets Point is the second stop coming out of Manhattan on the Long Island Railroad. It is 16 minutes going to Willets Point from Penn Station. It will be the same going from Grand Central. There will be some amount of headway in terms of getting on the AirTrain. It is a 6-minute ride. Combination of 16 and 6 is 22. So depending upon waiting time, it's an approximation, it's an estimate to give the public a sense of the amount of time it will take. 30 minutes as a round number is not a bad calculation.
And just to be clear, but you're not you're talking about arithmetic in a vacuum. You're not including how many more riders you're going to have to this route, the dwell times in the stations, anything like that? I mean, how do you value those different ways people could actually travel on this?
Well, in the context of the environmental review process, we will do all of those calculations. But as an approximation so that people can understand what it is we're talking about, 30 minutes is a good estimate as to what the reliable and predictable travel time from Midtown Manhattan to the airport will be.
Any other?
Mr.
Yes.
O'Toole,
Yes.
Anything on the badge investigation and also the investigation of the Rush Limbaugh escort? Asked you if you.
Be a little more specific on that when you said badge investigation.
When the world found out that commissioners are issued badges, there was discussion, who has badges, what's the policy with badges? You said you showed it to a grandchild or you showed it to your
I showed it to my
kids.
daughter. She's right here. She can vouch for that.
The utility of badges, the rules for using badges, you had said from this podium, we're going to be looking at the proper use and utility of these things, who should have them, and then, what's going on with that, and then secondly...
Let's take that one first before we get into the second one. So with regard to that, there was a request that the board had made to John Billich, our Chief Officer of Security, as to what the history was with the badges, and frankly, he was coming in today to brief us in executive. Prior to his briefing, the commissioners in a roundtable decided individually and then collectively that they thought it would be best to surrender the badges and just hand them in, which they did before they heard from the chief. Frankly, I had, and a number of us had turned ours in months ago just because it seemed like the appropriate thing to do given the climate and given the lack of utility other than the cosmetics of it to appease.
Before the traffic stop?
I'm sorry?
Before the traffic
It was
stop?
probably soon thereafter. It's probably when I surrendered it to the current secretary of the board. But all the commissioners got around the table. I've been talking about it for a while. Just on their own, give up the badges. It didn't seem like there was a utility. After they had all done that to a person, the chief came in and gave us the history as to how the birth of the badges, the utility, why they were used, pre 9/11, post 9/11, and after that, the chief came up with a recommendation that each of the commissioners just have an ID card that has their particulars on it, doing away with the use of having a badge, just having an ID with your name and other appropriate information, identifying information.
So is that going to be the new procedure? Is it going to just happen, or is it going to be an open vote, or just that's an
No, I think that's the procedure we're evolving. It appears that that's where we're heading in that direction. Have we formally adopted that? But that's the direction we've chosen to go in.
And are there people
Second part.
outside of the commissioner level that have badges? And Mr. Cotton said he had a badge. I don't know who else.
Frankly,
How far down they go?
I'm not aware of the folks that have the badges, and frankly, we'll ask the chief, John Billich, to give us an inventory of those folks who have it. We'll be more than happy to report back at the next meeting.
Someone who did have a badge was the previous superintendent. And what's going on with the Rush Limbaugh?
Sure. So I will tell you that we had an internal investigation that was done. Frankly, it was in two parts, one with regard to the former superintendent and one with regard to the larger issue of escorts. We have received a report, actually two reports, and we're going to be asking the Inspector General to come and brief the commissioners and senior staff at the July meeting. Frankly, we really anticipated to have an opportunity today, but our executive meeting was just so packed, we just simply didn't have time to have that. So out of that meeting, I suspect you'll be asking the same questions next month, and I'll be more than happy to give you some public comment on some of the, hopefully will be public details be released at that time.
Were they two Port Inspector General reports?
It was, I think, probably, you could say it was either two reports or it was two parts to a singular report looking at the global issue of escorts.
But it was the Port IG?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you.